The second type of codependency is what we call a falsely empowered codependent. The falsely empowered will minimize and deny their own feelings, and they see them as weaknesses. So that this in turn, because they have no empathy or care or compassion for self in codependency, this makes them lack empathy for other people's emotions. So if you have somebody who has a falsely empowered codependent with a typical disempowered, the typical disempowered may be very, very transparent about how they feel with their emotions, especially in intimate partner relations where the typical disempowered person is like, why can't you emotionally connect with me? I care about you. This is what I want. What do you want? Trying to find answers. And the falsely empowered they minimize and deny their own emotions and feelings so much that when the typical disempowered would say that to them, they have literally no empathy for the other person, that they're being hurt and harmed and not knowing how to navigate that. So they will just pull back. The falsely empowered, they're also very focused and invested in achieving what we would call like outside pursuits. So, like their career, focusing on themselves and their achievement. So, they need the approval and validation. A lot of people are like, are you sure this isn't narcissism? And, narcissistic personality disorder is a really, really serious diagnosis. And so what I like to do is refer to it as narcissistic characteristics. So there are a lot of similarities and overlap between the falsely empowered codependent and narcissistic characteristics. Just bearing that in mind as we go through this. But the falsely empowered person they need that approval and validation just like someone with narcissistic characteristics. And to get that, they will persistently label and judge and shame and blame and criticize other people. The falsely empowered might use sex, money, intellect, charm, or gifts to manipulate and groom the other person, to try to control them and to exert their power. There's always a power differential going on. They can also be indifferent and apathetic and patronizing, or other end of the spectrum, enraged to further exert control. So this less talked about type of codependent is going to try to control and impact other people's thoughts, feelings, and actions, right? But they do it by avoiding emotional, physical, intellectual, and sexual intimacy to maintain control and distance themselves to avoid vulnerability. And this is where that shame piece comes in for them. Addiction and outside interests can be used for more avoidance and distance. This type of person, the type of codependency behavior, they believe that any problems and issues that arise are because of other people's actions, other people doing this to them, right? So these codependents are created also from their childhood trauma. If you were to ask a falsely empowered codependent, what their childhood was like, they might say their childhood and parents were perfect, right? They had no problems growing up. Because if they admitted there was dysfunction, if they admitted there was trauma, there was abuse, that would show a level of vulnerability that they're really not comfortable with. So there are some similarities and there is some crossover between narcissistic characteristics and the falsely empowered codependent, but there are some differences too. One of the big differences that we see is addiction. I read something that said that if someone is addicted and they have narcissistic characteristics and are acting that way, that chances are they are a falsely empowered codependent, because a true narcissistic person won't give up that control long enough to be addicted to some kind of outside substance.